Hello, my name's Alan Curry and I'm standing here now under the title of Badge of Honour. Now, how did that happen? Well, I met a few people who had conversations relevant to today's society and maybe some of the concerns we might have about some of the youth and some of the individuals they may meet, some of the people who might be their heroes, some of the people who might be hero worshipped, if that makes sense. And maybe some of my background or some of my experiences others may listen to and wonder whether I could lead a type of life like that. Now, that's not to say I've had a perfect life, but I've done a number of things over the years that I'm probably very proud of. But I have to really start at the beginning where, it's an easy one, wasn't it? I was born at an early age. But I always interested now when I listen to politicians in particular, and they always seem to have to say they came from a working class background or their dad worked in a factory to sort of prove the meritocracy of what they're getting involved in. My father was a joiner, my mother worked in a shoe shop, and we lived in a 2-bedroom flat. And I don't think we were poor, but if we were poor, I obviously didn't know at such an early age. But they were role models for myself. Again, I wonder today when we discuss things, whether or not we have as many role models within the family as opposed to when we did in days gone by. I say days gone by because obviously I'm, a little older than some people. But my upbringing was very easy in the sense that I was looked after, I was well fed, I was nourished, but I was also a little bit of, how can I say, a little bit off the wall in some of the things I used to get up to. I remember my mum telling me that she was in bed and knocked on the door on the flat with a neighbour saying, "Do you know where Alan is?" Well, my nana, who was a good church-going lady, lived around the corner from us. It would appear that at 3 years of age, I climbed out the window at 10 o'clock at night and walked around with my nana's. We were the only flat in the location that had locks on the outside of the window to keep me in. Now, whether that was a good start for how I was going to make progress in my career or other things, it did appear that I had the element of thinking outside the box even at 3 or 4 of those type of things. We have another situation. I have a sister who's 18 months younger than me, and then my father and my mother used to make elderberry wine, which was alcoholic. Well, apparently I took her on the drink when I was 3 years of age and she was 18 months old, and the two of us were drunk at that time. But it was part of growing up. You learnt by your mistakes. There's a little thing, but there was 1 or 2 things I may not have got things right, and my mum would say, "Wait till your father got home." And he would never really chastise me, but it was the threat of the father. And when it comes to things like being at school, my mum used to put me out at 5, 6 years of age, and I'd walk to the local school. You don't see any of that now. I don't think any children know how to get to school other than buy a car. But on that same token, when I'm doing that type of thing, my father never ever really said good things about me. But that wasn't to say he wasn't proud of me, and we can go into later on about aspects of it. But when he always told my mum, particularly when I played in football teams and things like that, he followed me, he took me everywhere. He would always tell me when I had a bad game, and then I'd speak to my mum later on, and she would say, "Your dad said you had a good game today." And just that sort of kindness, respect, and actually looking always for not thanks, but just the fact he thought well of me. He also told me when I did things wrong, and if I was sick at school, and I've always had a good sickness record as an adult, but if I was sick at school, my father wouldn't allow me to stay off. But if I had to be off, my mum, you know what mums and dads are like, mum will say you shouldn't go to school. I had to stay in bed all day. There was no lying around watching television or anything like that. So there was no point of being ill because you never got a day off. And all those sort of things that we talk about now, parental responsibility, hopefully that's spun off into some of my life in relation to the way I brought my children up, and had some influence on my grandchildren. But it starts with the family. And I think if we go back to some of the things we're talking about, and maybe we'll progress as I talk about other things I've done in my career, I think the family, the cohesion within the family I'd love to see it come back, and maybe our heroes or people who we respect are not necessarily people who've made a lot of money or who actually drive fast cars, as opposed to people who may have a story to tell and can manage and work on the respect and responsibility from an upbringing and some of the responsibilities that adults have. Sadly, I do see certain aspects around the streets. I mean, I like to drink like everybody else now in this sort of world. And how many times now we go to a public house and the mother's there with the child and the child's running around the pub and without any respect for others. So all those little things from my background, bringing myself up to talk about these different things and how it helped me progress into the role I moved on to, my career, and even after a full career, we're maybe going to be talking about some of those things. And if anybody listens and thinks it's worthwhile, and I always used to say, if I'm talking to people and you like what I say and you think that's possibly for me, I could follow that, well, so be it. But if you say, well, it's not for me, well, once again, I haven't got the monopoly on wisdom. I have a lot of experience now, and sadly, you only get experience by making mistakes. But I would go back to the family upbringing as being a core part of my role, understanding, and how I progressed. So, I mentioned about my father, my parents, their influence. I went to, obviously, a junior school, and at those days, I keep saying those days, don't I? The 11 plus was the exam which separated people, pretty comprehensive what we do now. So at 11 plus, they separated in theory between the intelligent kids and maybe not so intelligent kids. So I sat 11 plus and didn't pass. So I went to what was then known as a secondary modern school. And I always remember in my junior school days, you used to get your school reports. And they used to say, and the one my mum always refers to is, Alan is quite happy with what he does. So I was quite happy playing football. I was quite happy doing what boys should do at school. And maybe studying wasn't my forte, but I didn't think I was thick. Or if I was, I didn't know I was. But on the same token, I failed my 11 plus, because you say fail now, or fail there, now you'd say you weren't successful. But I moved to what was then a secondary modern school. And the classes were graded A, B, C. I was in the A class. I've now put in amongst 100 children, shall we say, in the 11 years older. And my birthday is the 27th of August. So I was always the youngest in the class, with the way the classes were set out. And I went through the first year and I was the top student out of those 100. So I'm a failure at one school and I'm the most successful student at 11 years of age. How? I don't know. Probably Alan just woke up a little bit instead of actually being happy with what he does. And at those days, again, you could then sit what they call the 13 plus. And if you passed that, you moved to a grammar school because you were showing a bit of potential. Well, I still like to play football. I enjoyed what I was doing. I was with my mates. So the next year I wasn't the top student. Now that might just be laziness. It might just be the fact I might have been a little bit more cuter the way I wanted to operate, but I enjoyed where I was. And on reflection, it was a good decision of mine, even at 12 years of age, because the rest put me in store to how I progressed through. So I then ended up, and one of the best things that happened to me, I think, was having the ability to play for the local football team, the school team. Because when you play with teams and you're bonding with individuals, there's two parts happen to it. You get a bit of status within your peers because of the fact you're a member of the team. And we were quite successful, and you traveled with your friends and you did whatever. So around those sort of times, you would be getting more kudos than maybe you would if you were just a member of the gang. So I was, I've got to go back, as I'm going to talk about things, and I bring my parental responsibility in. Little sayings my dad always said. And so when you hear me talk about things I've done, he always used to say, self-praise is no recommendation. So when I'm talking like this, and I'm talking about me, and hopefully I'm saying some nice things about myself, there's a couple of bad ones I'm sure as well. But on the same token, just remember, self-praise is no recommendation. It's for you, the viewer, to make your mind up whether what I say has some merit, it's interesting, if it can be, and how you view it yourself. So I'm in the football team. Living in the Northeast, the key leaving at school at 15, which you could, I actually stopped on the following year till I was 16. But most people, I left school in 1972. I know as you look at me here, that seems a long way away with such a young looking face, but we'll carry on about that at a later date. But on the same token, in 1972, most people left school and went into an apprenticeship or they worked at the ministry. And I didn't think that was for me. I didn't like the idea of sitting behind a desk. I wanted to be active, and I wasn't sure about an apprenticeship either. So there was a thing called the police cadets. Now, the police cadets, police officers in the mid-70s were not well paid. Most people went into apprenticeships, and once they'd done an apprenticeship, they didn't leave the different trades to join the police. So they had a thing called police cadets for young people between 16 and 19, where they would keep them in the building, keep them on ice, if that makes sense, teach them good habits, but it wasn't the easiest thing to get into. So I applied, and my career development officer at the time said, look, don't bother, you're not going to get in. But I did apply, and I went to what was Morpeth at the time, if you know the area here, and went for my very first interview at 15 years of age. Never done anything like that before. Sat in front of 3 adult police officers and asked questions and did things. And some of the things I also did for my self-fulfillment was, I had 2 paper rounds, I played in a football team, I used to go out once a week to collect charity pool money to get little bits of extra pocket money to help myself for the youth club and all the rest of it. So when I'm doing this interview, I'm able to tell people what I'm doing, which is, I suspect at the time, was out of the ordinary, as I was trying to develop and create and be a better person for myself. And I know now, because I've seen the actual application form, and they viewed me, and they've always put at the bottom the comment, and it said, so I sat in front of 2 senior police officers, mature, obviously looking at only 15 years of age. They asked me questions, I hopefully answered them in an assertive but not cocky way. They must have seen something in me, but I've actually seen the application form, and it's not like today's recruitment, and it's got on the bottom of the form, will always give of his best, he's young enough, will never top the bill, worth a try. Now can you imagine that sort of introduction to a role, which actually wasn't the greatest sort of compliment, but I put it into perspective. I was one of 316 people who applied for 16 jobs, and I got one of them. So as a consequence, I'm now being accepted to be a police cadet. I'm just before my 16th birthday, and I go to a location known as Akeley Heads, where there's 120 cadets, male and female, in what really was a little bit of a boys' army situation. I was taught good habits. I was actually taught how to look after myself. I was taught how to keep fit. I was take care of myself, but also respect people, to understand discipline. The lights went out at 11 o'clock, curfew every night. And I suppose part I've maybe missed is here, what was my early influences to join the police? Well, if you're going to look back, and sadly on YouTube or whatever, if you follow that, you'll see some clips of 2 police shows at the time. One was Z-Cars and one was Dixon a Dog Green. And if you ever look at those in black and white, I actually thought that looks as if it's interesting. And on the same token, it looked as if I wouldn't be sitting behind a desk. Notwithstanding, we can talk about paperwork and things like that at a later date. And the other side, which was even then in me, people joined the police to be a help and source of respect and assistance to the community. So you actually did want to help people, and I'm sure we'll get in the opportunity where a number of times I've helped people, a number of times I may not have been thanked for it, but that didn't put you off doing it. So when I'm now at Akeley Heads, I spent 2 years there, and I was the youngest on the school again. I'm the youngest wherever I've gone. I'm probably still one of the youngest that's going to be on one of these films. We can talk about that again later on, but on the same token, so I'm now amongst bigger boys and girls, 18 and a half. In fairness, there was an element of, how can I put it, physical activity that was sometimes a little bit rough and coarse, but it didn't do any harm. I actually broke my leg when I was there playing football, and I was on crutches for 14 weeks. We had a PTI at the time who was, we loved him to death. But I went in to say, I'm sorry, Mr. Wardle, that's what they called him, I've broke my leg. He made me sit in the corner and do sit-ups for an hour. I wasn't allowed anything off. So, you know, I've talked about my dad wouldn't let us be off. And now even in the world I'm now frequenting, the discipline was there. Just because you've got a broken leg doesn't mean to say you can't participate. And it just, again, it was really character building. You took everything on the chin, you sort of learned, and then of course, you learned how to deal with adversity and the consequence of adversity. And from being a police cadet for 2 years, I didn't learn about the law, I just learned how to look after myself, discipline, how to maybe, as I said, deal with adversity. Not everything was right. Sometimes I hated it. I definitely hated the first year being away from home, but I wasn't going to give in. And I just thought, this is not going to beat me. And that turned me moving forward. So that takes me up to 18 and a half, 19 years of age. I've now joined the police. Hopefully what you've listened to on this episode takes you to that stage. The next episode will take us into the beginning of 32 years career in the police service of Northumbria.